My name is David Hantman. I'm the general manager here at Meritalk, and we are bringing everybody back together to continue our conversation on the OGR FITARA Scorecard and trying to dig beneath the surface a little bit more. Congressman Connolly, Congressman Meadows set the stage perfectly for us, talking about how the scorecard was crafted, and they provided their input there. So we want to dig a little deeper. So to help me do that and really to lead the conversation, to my left, we have Steve Cooper, who is the CIO of the Department of Commerce. To his left, Walker White, who's the president with BDNA. To his left, Steve Harris, who's the vice president and general manager with Dell Federal. And then rounding out our panel at the end, we have Milo Speranzo, who's the director of strategy and compliance with Avnet Government Solutions. So I just give a quick name and title so that I don't ramble on going through bios, and let these guys talk a little bit about themselves so you can hear from them rather than me. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you if everyone can take a couple minutes, introduce yourselves.
All right, thank you. I'm Steve Cooper. I have the privilege of serving as the Chief Information Officer of the Department of Commerce. Latter part of my career has been predominantly as a CIO, private sector, public sector, not-for-profit sector. Kind of in chronological order, I served as the CIO at Corning Incorporated. After 9/11, came into government, was appointed as the first CIO of the Department of Homeland Security. Right behind that, I served as the CIO of the American National Red Cross during Katrina, Rita, and Wilma. Went back to the private sector, came back to serve as the CIO of the Air Traffic Organization and the acting CIO of the Federal Aviation Administration. Retired for a second time, and then was asked to come back by this administration to serve in the Department of Commerce.
Great, thanks, Steve. My name is Walker White. I'm the president of BDNA Corporation, and BDNA is a company that focuses on enterprise IT data, the hardware, software, and the purchases of hardware and software that are kind of the building blocks for any sort of IT process or project improvement that's going to be done. I've been with BDNA for the better part of its lifetime, about 12 years. First as the Chief Technology Officer of the company, and now as the President, I guess the first guy to raise his hand. Before that, spent 12 years at Oracle Corporation and was the Chief Technologist for Oracle Federal, which was responsible obviously for all the work that Oracle did with inside the federal government, and spent the last 12 years atoning for those sins. So.
Hi, good morning. I'm Steve Harris. I'm responsible for Dell's federal business, and that's all products and all different areas of functionality. We look after a pretty broad ecosystem, not only of technologies, which looking at the full portfolio, we engage from the end user to the data center, and lots of services, software that supports IT capabilities and functionality. But we also have the federal systems integrators, 3,000 channel partners, and an army of people working directly with the end user every day. My career has been spent at Dell leading teams in the public sector, and I found that very rewarding. Really interesting to come to federal. I became the general manager about 2 years ago of this business, and so as I compare and contrast my career of working with CIOs to help them drive successful outcomes of their IT strategic plan, it's really amazing to be here at this time when FITARA is a really enabling factor. Looking forward to the conversation.
Hi, Milo Speranzo. I am the Director of Strategy and Compliance for Avnet Government Solutions. I have the longest title, probably the least important on the panel. Certainly the least technologically adept. Started my career, I was 14 years as a civilian with DoD in the intelligence space. The last 4 years focused on some very in-depth procurement with cross-agency, multi-agency scopes. Went to Avnet Government Solutions 4 years ago to build their federal business. We recently moved locations out here inside the Beltway. And Avnet, if you might not know, it's a $30 billion company. It's Fortune 100. Nobody's heard of it. They're focused on distribution in the IT space. And we hope that after this and soon, Avnet will be more of a household name within the Fed space.
Great. Appreciate you all joining us, and I think we get a a variety of perspectives, which was the point of putting this panel together, given all your current jobs and your background. So diving into things, although I kicked things off saying we don't want to get too hung up on the actual grades on the scorecard, it's a good place to start. So we have, I think, queued up a slide that shows the scorecard, which I just want to pull up quickly. And as far as all agencies, you've fared pretty well, so hopefully this isn't throwing anything uncomfortable out there. But there's a lot of colors. There's a lot going on here. We don't need to leave it up the whole time, but it shows.
That's right. You can leave it.
Yeah, I want to begin the conversation by getting in a little more detail, and you can see the categories at the top there that went into these grades. So you've got data center consolidation, IT portfolio review savings, incremental development, risk assessment, transparency. And so this is just my personal take. When you see a headline talking about the poor grades on FITARA implementation, I think that's newsworthy because people don't know what to expect, and it's surprising to see that the grades are that low. If the headline read, agency progress slow on data center consolidation, that's not so newsworthy. So I think that brings me to my first question, is looking at this scorecard, are you surprised by what you see?
Okay, so I'm guessing, since I'm the government voice on this panel, and my colleague Rich McKinney is the government voice on the early afternoon panel, we're not necessarily speaking on behalf of all departments across government, but we'll try to come reasonably close. The first thing that I want to tell you in all candor, while I do believe that the Department of Commerce and the work that we've done to date was actually very well positioned, we got a little bit lucky in the choice of the 4 attributes that were used by Congress in this first congressional scorecard. So if one believes that luck is when preparation meets opportunity, I'm okay with that. We were reasonably well prepared. But I will admit, they could have chosen some different metrics where we might not have fared as well. Having said that, what's interesting and what's valuable and what I might suggest you guys do, I'll try to give you a quick little summary, and I've got a little cheat sheet here in front of me that I want to use so I get it right. The labels are reasonably accurate for those four dimensions. But it's important to understand what is actually behind each metric. So very quickly, data center consolidation is not about the number of data centers that an agency has consolidated or reduced. It actually speaks specifically, we were graded on the percentage of planned savings related to what we actually realized, okay? So it's the economic or the cost reduction side of data center consolidation on that one. And they've got a little formula that you guys can find online as how they calculated that. For the portfolio review savings, it's based around each agency's total portfolio stat savings basically divided by its IT budget. So you end up kind of getting a ratio, and then that ratio is compared to the leading agency's ratio. So there's a bit of a grading on the curve, if you will, in how that particular score was calculated. Okay, then likewise, incremental development, that's the percentage of an agency's IT projects associated with major IT investments, which you can find on the public-facing CIO, OMB CIO scorecard, that developed functionality every 6 months. So this is OMB's push to drive toward iterative or agile development. Okay? The idea being deliver functionality, or another way to think about it, this is how we define it in commerce. Deliver value as defined by our customers, our internal agencies, in 6 months or less. Okay? So it's that customer-defined value. And then lastly, the risk assessment transparency. Now this one's interesting. I'm going to summarize this in my own words. The more risk that you actually identified, the better your score.
Yeah.
Okay? It's that simple. And what they did is they then grouped They just, I think somewhat arbitrarily, but they grouped it by sets of 5. So the 5 agencies reporting the most risk were given an A, the next 5 a B, the next 5 a C, the next 5 a D, and anybody else got an F.
Right.
So it's important to understand what those colors and scores actually represent. All right. Having said that, okay, I will also share with you that based on a number of conversations that the federal CIOs are having both with OMB, with Tony Scott and his team, and with Congress, as all of us begin our FITARA hearings on the Hill, what we're hearing from Chairman Meadows and Congressman Connolly and the others, Congressman Hurd, Congressman Johnson, who are the 4 chairs that really are driving FITARA in Congress, is there will most likely be a scorecard that will be used for all agencies to more or less grade the agencies on FITARA. But it's more likely not to be this first congressional scorecard, but rather an agreement that's reached between OMB and Congress to more comprehensively address where we want to go with the benefits that FITARA brings to federal agencies.
I'm curious to get your take on, first I want to finish down the line on this question, but what might be on that future card, because there's some things noticeably not on this card. So let me, before give you the chance to answer, and because you're not on the receiving end of these grades, maybe tack on to the question.
It's really easy not to be on the receiving end of grades.
Were you surprised at the scorecard, and what's your company doing to help bring up these grades?
Well, I think first I think Steve's being a little bit humble, because I actually spent I'm probably the only person on this panel anyway that spends I probably spend 2/3 of my time in the commercial sector and about 1/3 of my time in the public sector with CIOs and gentlemen in the Global 2000. Earlier, or at the end of last week, I spent some time with the CIO of a Global 10 company here in the States. And we were talking about some of the things that they were focused on as they move into, coming out of 2015, moving into 2016. And they identified directly, the first being security and/or risk. The second thing they identified was consolidation, virtualization, efforts to reduce the infrastructure that's in place. And the third thing was a rationalization of the applications that they had and duplication they had in their environment. And it is very, very easy to align that information up to the 3 of the 4 elements that make up the FITARA scorecard. So while I think humbly you say, hey, we got lucky, you're clearly focused on those initiatives that are spanning not just the commercial space, but the government space as well. The bottom line is that this is where the money is, right? And why do people rob banks, right? Because that's where the money is. This is where the opportunities are for savings. And so I think you're being a little easy on yourself. You put yourself in a very good rate. As far as those 3 are concerned, from BD&A's perspective, and why do we find ourselves in this conversation? Because I'm not a security tool, I am not a consolidation tool, and so on. But what BD&A brings to bear and brings to our customers is the ability to take this morass of information that they have and bring order to that data such that they can prosecute initiatives around understanding what their risk profile is, understanding where the opportunities are for consolidation, and potentially understanding where applications are for rationalizing their environments as well. So you should go easier on yourself there, Steve.
Thanks.
Well, thanks. My first reaction to the scorecard was that I noticed that blue was the color that they used for the areas where agencies received an A, and blue is Dell's corporate color, so I thought it was an excellent choice.
Very good.
I think we have to recognize that the CIO's job is a very, very difficult job, no matter where you are, whether that's in the commercial sector or other areas in the public sector. When the CIO's not empowered, it's an impossible job. The CIO has to build alignment between the budget and where an agency is trying to go, and the technology that connects the people with the agency's mission. And so it's naturally a change agent role. A good CIO is always capable of being an effective change agent. And they understand how to use people, process, and technology to be a change agent that supports the mission in a really positive way. And so, as a person that has spent his career working to create successes with CIOs across the public sector, I try to put myself in their shoes as often as I can as I think about their challenges. I look at this scorecard and I say, hey, as a change agent, this is a great call to action. Right? So if I've got a sea of red, I've got new regulations that more clearly put me in charge of my budget, I look at this and I say, hey, I'm going to leverage this to get people on board. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, so we're a relatively new organization. Although Avnet's been around for 100 years, Avnet Government Solutions is only 2 years young. And this crazy rainbow was great news for us. We geared our strategy in building towards Legacy Klinger-Cohen, towards FITARA, some of the CFARs, the FAR regulations, and really built our go-to-market off of that. If this scorecard would have came out for us and been all blue or all red, it wouldn't have given us the ability to, Jerry Maguire the industry, the help me, help you. If it's all perfect or it's all terrible, we have nowhere from an industry standpoint where we could have focused. We had initiatives this year that focused on portfolio stat, for instance, that second line, and worked with some of those agencies, including Treasury. I'd love to say that we got that B for Treasury, but it's just not the case. We might have helped, but this is really a template for us from an industry standpoint towards the future and how and who we interact with at the agency level. And coming from a fairly long federal background in those 14 years, it's tough to find a scorecard that is honest. And I say that little tongue-in-cheek, but a lot of times you will see, and we were worried with this scorecard, it would come out as a all, what's B, I think blue and green, or an all red scorecard, which wouldn't have really given us the ability to focus and assist the agencies moving forward as well as we could. So we were, I don't want to say pleased with the amount of red. That's right. Mean-spirited and rude. I would not say that, but we were actually pleased to see the scorecard for sure.
So let me go back to a point, Steve, you made about what's not on this scorecard and what you might look for in the future. I think even a category in its own, CIO empowerment, or the ability for agencies to meet those needs and to have that implementation plan, which, to be fair, they're still working on. I think USDA and NSF may be the only two that have their public plan out there, and OMB will talk about that a little later. But as those plans come out, is that something that's going to be graded directly, or is that going to be a read between the lines? And
yeah, I don't know. From our conversations, meaning my conversations with OMB and my team's conversations, all of the agencies are working to have their FITARA implementation plans approved by OMB and then publicly posted by the end of the calendar year. We're close at Commerce. We're going back and forth and tweaking a few things that OMB would like to see, and that's mostly around, in our case, a few more specific details and time, deadlines. Okay, what by when. I admit I kind of was hoping I'm saying this with a smile and a bit playfully this morning, I was hoping I could maybe fudge just a bit on some of the by when dates, just to give us a little bit more flexibility within the agency. But the value of publishing our scorecards, I think, is twofold. One, it absolutely does allow anybody, certainly industry, other government agencies, to take a look and see what departments are planning to do. It's extremely valuable and helpful to me as a federal CIO to actually read other colleagues' implementation plans, because it may give me ideas around better or best practice or things that I and my team may have actually overlooked. So that's a positive. And for any interested citizen, why not? They can take a look and see what's going on. So to me, that's a positive. But the second one is very important in my mind. And that is, and I think all of us experience this, when that plan gets published, I'm on the hook. It's about accountability. It makes it clear to anybody, as the CIO, I'm now accountable. And my secretary and deputy secretary are going to hold me accountable to deliver to that implementation plan. I have no issue with that. I think any of us that have achieved success in our careers, wherever that may be, absolutely understand and have no issue with this is about accountability. I would argue that that's a huge positive in what FITARA is actually working to achieve. The ability to actually hold the CIO, and then in turn, we have authority to hold others across the department accountable, not just the IT community. We're working collaboratively within the Department of Commerce with both department level CXOs, my CFO, my Chief Human Capital Officer, and my Chief Acquisition Officer, as well as Bureau CXOs, so that this becomes a positive, unified, collaborative experience. That didn't happen with Klinger Cohen. I view this as hugely positive. The other thing that I'm leveraging, and a direct answer to your question, I might encourage Congress and OMB to consider putting on here the visibility in some way that they can figure out about the CIO's ability to see and certify, sign off on bureau or component investments to a greater degree than we have visibility today.
Interesting.
So,
yeah, my only thought on this, again, we're looking on the outside, but looking at it from my perspective and the seat I hold at BD&A, is to ensure that whatever those plans that come out, that the plan doesn't become the focus, rather the outcome becomes the focus, right? And that's, if the plan becomes the focus, it's kind of contrary to your incremental development, right? Agile development is all about, doing, and as we implement at BD&A in our software, you do a sprint of work, you evaluate where you are, and then, you potentially revector based on what you've learned in each of those phases. So I think it's essential that, if we don't drop plans in place, or CIOs don't drop plans in place that have a 24-month horizon, and there is the opportunity in that plan to revector based on what outcomes we're achieving and what timelines. And I think that it's very much in alignment probably with your incremental development, because if you're waiting, you're kind of at odds with basically that primary score.
Yeah, I listened with such interest to Steve's answer that I forgot the question, but anybody who works for me will tell you that I don't need a question to be able to talk about something. So, creating value is something I think Steve has said numerous times, and I think that IT leadership is an ideal platform to create value. Then you hear a lot, and Tony Scott often references flipping the 80-20. And flipping the 80-20 has been a mantra for Dell for a long time, for about a decade. It's been a mantra, in terms of how we build our portfolio of products. It's been a mantra internally. Over years, and I think it's very important to say over years, Dell took what was an 80-20 spend, 80 on legacy systems, sustainment, 20 on innovative IT, down to about a 50-50. Okay, and at this point, we're better than 50-50. By doing that, we literally saved hundreds of millions of dollars a year on our IT spend, and at the same time, we're able to invest in disruptive technologies that gave our mobile workforce an advantage, that put analytics in the hands of people so we can make better decisions and serve our customers better. So it's real stuff. As I look at all of the agencies and I think about what in fact flipping the 80-20 means, I get really excited. When I think about spending too much to deliver payroll, Using a legacy platform, let's say you could save 80 or 90% by moving to a different platform and still, deliver payroll on time every time. People don't care what you're running payroll on as long as they get their money when they're supposed to get it, right? And they have their tax records at the end of the year and things like that. But they care an awful lot about the tools that they have to do their job, right? When you enhance those tools and you make each end user more effective supporting the mission of the agency, it's powerful stuff. And so I encourage everybody to think about, hey, what does the flipping the 80-20 really mean in the context of each of these agencies? And when you do that, and you think about the business transformation possibilities and opportunities, you do nothing but get excited.
Yeah, it's for sure. So from our standpoint, the transparency, we hope that continues. To echo Steve's point earlier, to have that resource to be able to go out and look at a CIO plan, look at an agency plan, and know that the accountability is there. There's a lot of plans out there and a lot of regulations where accountability might have not have been as defined or a bit lax. It doesn't seem to be the case with FITARA. It seems like it's really the dynamic scoring, the ability to see solutions as solutions. And everything's not commoditized. Commoditization is great. I mean, it lowers the price for the government agencies when you're talking about pieces and parts. But when you try to take that commoditization and move it into the solutions that are needed within the agencies to get these scorecards up, it's sometimes that's difficult. Sometimes the LPTA world doesn't fit. And from what we've seen, the scoring, the interaction with the CIOs has been so much more dynamic in the past just couple years that it's really a godsend for us. So we hope the transparency continues as we go forward. That would be wonderful for, and I say it again, for us to help, the help me, help you mentality. And for everybody in the room, if you're not taking a look at those, at least glancing through each one, you're doing yourself a disservice, because we've seen that they very closely track to what the agencies focus on, as they go forward throughout the year.
Touching on some of the aspects of FITARA that set it up for success, I was jotting down my notes, questions I wanted to ask. I had one on why will FITARA succeed where Klinger-Cohen failed. Scratched it out because I thought it's been discussed plenty. And then you all had a discussion about it when we were waiting to come on stage, and I thought it was actually very interesting. So I want to bring that question back up and get everybody's stance on why will things be different this time around. Steve, we can start with you.
All right, okay. An important factor in my mind, not too long after Klinger-Cohen was first passed, and you guys can double check this, I think it was 96, it might have been 98, but it was somewhere in that time frame. Both Klinger and Cohen left Congress. Yeah. So the two key sponsors, or the two key champions, were no longer visible or in roles where they could actually continue to help the agencies leverage Klinger-Cohen. As important, during a lot of the years that I served before FITARA, OMB and the White House really didn't make it a high priority. So that's not criticism. There are a lot of things going on, and not everything can be, obviously, an administration's highest priority. But I do think that the emphasis that OMB in particular, and now Congress, particularly with Connolly and Meadows, and then Darrell Issa, who was Connolly's co-sponsor in writing FITARA, I think the emphasis and the sustained emphasis that Tony Scott, OMB, and Congress are placing on FITARA will absolutely make a huge and beneficial difference in the implementation and carry-through on FITARA.
Right. Yeah, again, I'll make it a commercial analogy here from my experience, is that the struggles that, if you look at any, just because I was with one, a large bank, basically, you will have a situation where you'll have a CIO, and then that bank will be made up of, private wealth, investment banking, commercial banking, retail banking, so on and so forth. And each of those individual units of that business have, separate P&L responsibilities, and they have separate CIOs that operate them. And yet the responsibility all the responsibility for achieving savings and compliance lies with the person at the top, but often they don't have all the authority they need to do that. The only way to accomplish that, of course, is to have appropriate sponsorship, right? So, like in any project, any undertaking, having the appropriate level of sponsorship is critical. So I think that as long as that continues to hold, you guys will, better than I what's in the, the speeds and feeds of the actual, of the language. But as long as the sponsorships exist, I think you've got a far better chance of success.
Yeah, we've got to seize the moment. The initial momentum is fantastic. And so, the ability then to create some early successes will continue the momentum. And everybody knows when a good thing is happening, everybody wants to be part of it. And so delivering early successes around shared services, you heard the example of the CIA being referenced earlier. The more positive things that happen, the more that the agencies will learn from each other, and the more resistance will actually decrease. My experience in the public sector tells me that, and I'll look at a university system. I worked with SUNY, 64 campuses, and each of those 64 campuses were doing things differently, and they were running every service themselves. It was all on premise. Over time and over years, they began to actually implement private clouds, share services, and things that were initially resisted became the standard. And deans and presidents of universities that said, hey, you're going to pry my technology from my data center when you take my job away, right? All of a sudden it became avant-garde, and they're saying, well, hey, how do we move everything off premise? Right? We had to cut a little time out. You got to slow down a little bit. You might want to shove everything into the cloud tomorrow. You got to be strategic, and you got to move at a measured pace. But I think I think the point is right on the money that we have the support now. It is amazing, and so if we keep this thing moving, I think it'll be like an avalanche in a positive way, a good avalanche.
Good avalanche.
An avalanche of goodness.
Yes, understood. Those are the best type. My answer will be fairly short. So just to echo what Steve said, I think the Clinger and Cohen exodus was really, I don't want to call it a death knell, but it was the beginning of the end for the Clinger and Cohen Act. As you hear Tony Scott talk today and you hear from Steve and the other CIOs how FITARA is embraced, I can't imagine that this isn't the gold standard as we go forward. It's not like something we've heard in the past. Tech has become, and IT is very in vogue these days, maybe not for a good reason. You go to Target and your info's stolen. You see Sony, you see George Clooney sending out emails about how fat one of his male co-stars are or something like that. It's very top of mind in the world. So that relates also to the government. IT is more top of mind now, and security drives a lot of that. And certainly this is about security, but it's not all about security. But that focus, as well as the really acceptance of FITARA by the current CIOs, which is great, I think is going to make this a long-standing endeavor, for sure.
Curious how long, what the longevity here is in more detail.
Yeah, sure.
I think everybody said the word momentum, that FITARA is just a big deal, and that's why it's front and center right now. I think a lot of that, some of that at least, is that something like FITARA is signed into law. Usually you'd see the language read, agencies have 3 to 5 years to put a plan in place. I think the fact that there was a year forced it to be front and center. So final plan's due December 31st. What happens 2016? It's obviously still front and center, but does it continue to be so important, and for how long?
Yeah, I view this a little bit differently, and again, I'm being a bit playful on purpose. Okay, so FITARA is not a sprint. All right, this is not the 30-day cyber sprint. Yes, we got pressure to kind of put our implementation plans in place, but come on. This is not a one-shot implementation plan. We'll continue to refine our plan as we learn more and as our strategic and near-term strategies and objectives change. We'll update our plan. So the way that we've begun to leverage and influence thinking in commerce is exactly that. We happen to have a secretary, Penny Pritzker, who is a marathon runner and has won many marathons and continues to run even in her role as secretary. She finds time. She's a remarkable individual. So she herself is emphasizing a couple things. One, this is a race that we will continue to run through the tape. That's her internal phrase. It means you don't ease up and stop short of your goal. You run through the tape. You continue. That means that we absolutely are intending over the next X number of years, we plan to sustain the momentum. We're going to carry through whatever we put in our plan today, and whatever we add or revise to our plan, we will accomplish. I would urge, and this is where the private sector absolutely is invaluable, industry, please read these plans. Bring ideas and bring solutions. If you see yourself in some of the things we have in our implementation plans, please come talk to us. Contact us. We don't know everything. We don't have all the answers. Come on, you guys know that. There's been a pretty powerful partnership, not in a legal sense, collaboration between industry and government for a long time. We expect that to continue. But FITARA and these plans give us a way to be even more effective in that relationship. Okay? Please take advantage of it.
Right. Yeah, I think that kind of reflecting back on the previous one, why will it be different than Klinger-Cohen, and then subsequent to follow on, why will it maintain itself? I think to Steve's point he made earlier is that, John Cotter wrote, the very famous book Leading Change, right, which is basically about, how do you actually implement change and make it part of the culture of the business. And I think that the key point is right now, which is overcoming inertia, right? To get the ball rolling, and that's going to be the hardest work, right? And I think that the success that Steve on this side has had already at Commerce has started that ball rolling. But I think that there are in industry, for example, when I'll speak for ourselves, BD&A, we have tools, we have capabilities that I think can help people vastly accelerate and get what is so critical about leading change, which is early wins that Steve on this side talked about earlier. You've got to get people bought off on and build those teams that are saying, hey, we were able to accomplish things. And I think that's why it's so important when you look at the scorecard that they include, there's risk, there's consolidations for the portfolio, and then consolidations, but there's also incremental, right? And I think that is a very, very important part of change and getting the ball rolling. But once the ball rolls, it becomes more difficult to stop it, right? It has momentum at that point, as Steve was mentioning.
Thanks. One of the tough thing about being on a panel is sometimes your answer is taken by the person before you, and you're all thinking, well, so why don't you just pass and you give us all a break?
Not gonna happen.
Come up with a different answer. So you actually put the CIO in charge, right? And that gives them real authority, and they're a cabinet level member of the senior executive team. And so they take that authority and they create an IT strategic plan. And that plan is supposed to create value through transforming business through the application of IT and take cost out of delivering on corporate IT or administrative stuff by transitioning from legacy expensive proprietary platforms to open systems and lower cost stuff. You're supposed to enhance cybersecurity. And you hear Tony Scott talk about secure by design, and you have excellent capabilities like the NIST framework, where you can put together a solution that is secure by design if you use NIST. And now the CIO, because they have this great IT strategic plan, and all the actual functional leaders are bought in on it, so that they have the support that they need. to do what they've got to do. Now, the regulations say, hey, you're allowed to buy a solution as opposed to buy it commodity by commodity by commodity. And so, these are a lot of the challenges that needed to be eliminated to allow for progress. But what are the, in the short term, what are some of the most difficult obstacles to making, to achieving some very material wins? Let's say you have an enterprise environment, and it's an enterprise application. You can look at it, you say, this is a mission critical application. I have to secure it. I have to provide it. I could modernize it. There's a lot of things I could do, and if I modernized it, I would save this much money over 4 years. But I'm going to have to spend money to save money. Well, FITARA is not a funding bill. I mean, it doesn't provide funding. It provides authority over existing funding. So how do we give these ladies and gentlemen that have this new level of empowerment? How do you give them the ability to remove some of the obstacles from creating the biggest wins in the short term?
Yeah, from our standpoint, echo what everybody says. We see FITARA is in for the long haul, and you see it based on how the agencies have handled and how the FITARA team has handled hiccups that have occurred. No major program like this is ever going to come out, and the first iteration is obviously the one that's rolled with throughout the years. We saw issues with some of the data center consolidation pieces, and you paint this box blue and change the room number to 202 from 201, and all of a sudden you've consolidated and you get an A. So the malleability that the CIOs have had to change when hiccups were noticed, and the ability to mold the programs and the regulations throughout just the past 2 years has been monumental for us. The ability to buy solutions, for instance, has been something that, although that word has been talked about, solutions has been talked about for years. It's like cloud, I mean, of course the buzzword is out there, but the embracing of the solutions and thinking out of the box and portfolio stat and true ups and bringing in outside firms that typically weren't engaged by the government, such as distribution on our end, has been something that's really eye-opening. So that change in philosophy, I think, is what we target as something where we really believe FITARA is here to stay for years and years.
David, can I sneak a thought in?
Yes.
That I think kind of builds on what each of my colleagues have said here. I want to give you a viewpoint. I can't attest that it's necessarily a majority viewpoint among federal CIOs, but I want you to at least hear it. It's my viewpoint. I want to give you a very quick take on cost and cost reduction and value. I'm not a believer at all, either in my private sector experience or in government, that things should be driven to achieve cost reduction. I argue that's not the right focus. I understand and take very seriously my fiduciary responsibility to invest every dollar of taxpayer dollars in IT and in my areas of responsibility. But here's what I mean as the different focus. I'm focused on delivering value as defined by my clients or customers, agencies, whoever I deliver product and service to. Let's take the data consolidation initiative and that metric as an example. Right? The scorecard measured, as I told you, the savings realized. So if all you listened to and all you looked at was, oh, percentage savings, okay, great, cost reduction. That's exactly what you walk away with. Right? But let me give you a different model that I'm driving and have driven in each of my previous CIO roles. Why the move to the cloud? It's not about cost reduction. If I move all of my data centers, except my classified and mission unique stuff, not going to do that. There will be data centers that, because of their unique role, we are going to continue to manage, own, run, whatever. But let's take mission enabling types of activities. The ability for me to get out of the ownership and management of a data center, that's not my forte, that's not my expertise. There are companies that do that for a living, and they do it extraordinarily well. They can realize sustainability requirements. They can realize energy and efficiency savings. We can't do that very effectively inside government. But the most important value, the ability to deliver value almost in real time. When I have a new requirement and I've got to stand up new server capability, if I have to go through the government process to go buy something, Dell servers, playfully,
Appreciate
okay,
that.
or whatever, okay, I can't do that in anywhere near real time. It could take me 6 months simply to get the acquisition in place. If I go to a cloud provider and they're busy messing around with the data center and everything related to it, I have the ability to deliver almost instantaneous surge value when new requirements hit my area of responsibility or any of my bureaus. And in my experience, in every case, if I'm focused on delivering value like that, immediately respond to new requirements for my clients, cost savings follow. They don't have to leave. And I measure cost in terms of unit cost of the service delivered. Unit cost of the service delivered. If I can continually drive the unit cost down, I'm golden. The absolute dollars may indeed go up. If there's more demand for a particular service, guess what? The absolute total, which is the way OMB and Congress sometimes accidentally measure things, it looks like I'm not doing a good job. You see the point that I'm making? I do not focus on cost reduction. I focused on value delivery, and in every case in my career, cost savings in some real, tangible, measurable way have followed. So what do you think of that?
I'll give you the perspective again. I'll give a commercial perspective because there are very few conversations that we have about, just tell me about the dollars and how that's going to affect the dollars. It's all about capabilities for the business. And I just, in the last 6 months, I've probably heard that kind of unit cost argument, 10 or 15 times. It's a very, very essential part, and it's really where the conversation begins, right? What do we want to do? Because a lot of these things are, particularly if you look at back to the scorecard, where risk avoidance, particularly, to the point that Milo was making about, whether it's, well, I wouldn't have gone with George Clooney, but Target or whatever it is that's out there. These are very, very real, brand damaging things that are occurring to these organizations. And certainly OPM has experienced something very similar. So the value is a very, very key aspect of what they're doing. And to your point, Steve, I think it's a secondary or tertiary thing, which is the cost that comes out of it.
Yeah, and Steve is leading edge as far as CIOs go, and I'm not just saying that because we're on the same panel and I'm afraid of him, which I am. But you'll see across the board, the CIOs have this new way of thinking, this value. How do we implement when we're given a FITARA scorecard that we have to complete in 30 days? The solutions that you have on the books that allow you to stand up whatever that is that you need to get from point A to B or to get from a C to a B in the scorecard is really the conversation that we're having with the CIOs. It's not the LPTA, let's talk about next year, we want to buy X, Y, and Z. The conversation has certainly changed, which echoes why I think as well FITARA is here to stay, and we're having that conversation with a lot of the agencies right now.
And that conversation's a very important conversation. I've got an army of people out there talking with the customer every day, and we understand requirements, we understand where they're trying to go. We put together a solution, includes multiple points of our own technology, lots of third-party intellectual property, good stuff. We then see those solutions move to the contracting shop, and they're then deconstructed, right, and bid out, and what then comes back to that team that invested a bunch of time to create a requirement around solution is now all of these things that aren't what they wanted, and that they have a very hard time putting back together to be an optimal solution. And so we do a lot of damage when we try to say that the most value is directly associated or primarily associated with the lowest price. And there's a million analogies that we can all think of to support that, whether it's the car we drive or the house that we live in, right? So anyways, I think you made a great point.
Steve, Walker, Steve, and Milo, thank you for leading that discussion. That was great and appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.